Welcome to another lecture. This one we're going to be talking about the importance of social presence and how we accomplish that in an online environment. We know that the internet is certainly a social space. Today, the internet is woven into so many aspects of our life. I mean, we shop online, we bank online, we communicate online. We accomplish many of our daily communications and transactions online. And as a result, even though we can't see the actual person in many instances, we still want to work together. We still want that social presence. If we look at the widespread use of Facebook, that is a very good example of the need for many people to have that social presence. Of course, Facebook is only one example, and I'm sure you can think of some other ones that would be adding social presence to your life. As the internet and the technologies available through the internet have evolved, we see more and more of a social direction happening with those new technologies. And in this class, we're going to be talking about things like wikis and blogs and how those really increase social presence. But to create presence in an online environment, we need to think and feel and behave differently than we do in a face-to-face environment. All of a sudden, we have to become aware of the intentions of others, their thoughts, their emotions, their behaviors, and to sometimes read between the lines to decide what they're really trying to say. In this lecture, we will look at creating that sense of social presence and why it's so important. We're also going to look at some of the web-based tools that are available, and I already mentioned a couple of them, blogs and wikis, that can help begin to build a sense of belonging. So really, what is social presence? Well, there's two types. The first one is called telepresence, and that really sounds more like technology, doesn't it? But telepresence is the sense of being there. And I'm sure you've all done this. If you have ever played on a Wii on the television and played a game of golf, that was telepresence. The Wii made it seem to you as if you were on an actual golf course and actually swinging a golf club. I've tried it and I still wasn't very good at it. No better than on the regular golf course. So that's what telepresence is all about. Telepresence in the online environment happens when the learners have the impression or the feeling that they are present at a location remote from their actual location where they are. Social presence means interactions with others in an online environment. This can occur when you're actively involved even in a discussion in your own class. The other type of social presence is when we have the feeling that the instructor is available and present and wants to answer questions. It's also a time when students truly are interacting with each other, and that starts to develop that sense of social presence. Each student is there and together with others in the class. So, how do we create this social presence, especially if we're designing an online class? Creating social presence is a result of awareness, of understanding, of involvement, and experience in the virtual environment. All of these qualities are kind of interwoven together in the online class with both the instructor and the students. So students and instructors need to be aware of what's going on in the classroom, be aware of the understanding of the topic that's being built. If there's no feeling of presence, then I can guarantee you there is a feeling of isolation. And we've talked about that a little bit in an earlier lecture, in that people who have that feeling of isolation really are not learning at their highest level. And the rates of dropout and dissatisfaction with online classes seems to certainly be enhanced. Social presence also provides an opportunity for a richer social atmosphere where high levels of dialogue and critical thinking can be developed. So think about that. When you are actively involved in a discussion or even actively involved in a traditional classroom, you have a higher level of dialogue. You're trying to share with someone else what you know. You're trying to verify your own knowledge. You're probably also trying to get to know that person a little bit better. The communication needs to be meaningful and to revolve around real world application of that content. So sometimes social presence is simply chatting with someone else, but social presence can take that next level and it can become a real tool for learning. We are all social creatures. And when social presence is absent, we tend to crave it and look for ways that we can interact with others more often and in different ways to accommodate that absence. Our social nature is integral to our perceptual process. When we interact with each other, we are really interacting with the real world. With social presence, we interact with the information and others in the online environment, which requires others to then interact with us. Individually, we seek a sense of information from our peers. We want to be learning from our instructors, from the internet, from the textbook, or any way that we can bring that information into our own world. But then that social presence is a sense of sharing and further refining that new knowledge that we are learning. We search for appropriate resources to challenge, to support, and to enhance this learning. Think about that. Do you do that when you're learning? If you have something new that you've learned in this class, do you then look for other resources? That might challenge you further or might support what you just learned? The early aspects of social presence and also the early research on social presence was thought to occur when students could hear their instructor's voice. And that voice and the intonation helped the students feel like they were more connected to the instructor. That was the early days of audio delivery. But today we have video and other applications that allow that same feeling of connectiveness to be much more enhanced. We also need to speak again about the transparency of the technology. The transparency means that the technology is not seen. Instead, it simply conveys the material. So after students become more familiar with an online classroom, with the learning management system, with how to save and upload their work, suddenly the technology is no longer a distraction. And I'm sure all of you feel that way right now. You're pretty well ingrained in how this course is working, and so you probably don't pay much attention to the technology at all. For you, the technology has become transparent. But we also need to talk about how do we create that social presence and even take it to a higher level. And one of the ways to do that is something called collaborative learning. That's where many students work together on a project. And I'm going to explain that to you a little bit more. You might be thinking, but wait a minute, we learned about adult learning theory, andragogy, and in that theory, we learned that some adults don't like working in groups. But that's important to note and try to find ways around that as you're starting to build more social presence in your own classroom. Let me further define this collaborative learning. This encompasses a variety of different educational approaches and techniques, but it always involves a shared intellectual effort by two or more people. These activities can be as simple as discussions in your classroom, but they can also move beyond that, where students become a part of a research team. And maybe they're the only ones working in that team, but often there's a subject matter expert. That can be the professor, but it could be someone else who is willing to participate in this research. So students are given a project, they're given a question that needs to be solved, and they work together to come up with a solution to the problem. You should be aware that this type of learning requires higher level thinking skills and certainly higher levels of interaction. With collaborative learning, peers become responsible not only for their own learning, but also for expanding that new knowledge to others and for asking for verification. This type of social presence also builds the students' awareness of different perspectives on the topic. So if your students were doing a collaborative project on, let's say, the causes for World War I, they may come to many, many different perspectives from the other students or also from that subject matter expert that might be joining their group. By justifying and defining their own ideas, students build a deeper knowledge and a sense of presence in their online environment. A learning community is a group of people who share a common interest on a topic or a common problem to be solved. When you think about using a wiki and you go in and you read about a topic of interest and you're able to add to that information or you're able to take away from that, that certainly is an example of today's learning community. Collaborative learning is involved with the building of a community. It allows for not only social presence in the class, but it also is an organizing structure on which new knowledge is being built. It allows students to share their learning experiences. A collaborative activity is one really good way to create social presence. And you'll learn about other things as we go through, other ways to do that as we go through this class. Professors and students take on complex roles as the students work toward a more interdependent and interactive learning experience. Students work in teams. The accomplishment of the entire team becomes the primary focus. It's not just that one individual learner working at home on one little project. It's all of that team working together to come up with the biggest and the best solution to the problem that they've been given. Individual control of learning develops as the learning environment suddenly works together to create social presence and collaborative knowledge. So think about some of the other ways that you might get involved with others on a particular topic that you have an interest in. If you're someone who races horses, where would you go online in the virtual world to learn more about increased exercise or different diets? What about growing a garden? How would you find out more if you've never done that before? What kinds of groups might you join in your neighborhood or in your online neighborhood to get more information about growing a successful garden in your area? So all of that is ways to establish social presence in the online classroom.